Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome back to another video game review. And today's review, I finally get to review Sifu. Yes, I finally get to review it. But I'm sure some of you are going to be asking the question, wait a minute, didn't this come out in February? Digitally, yes, it did. But the physical came out literally at the beginning of May. And I was waiting to get the physical version because I wanted to get it physical. And I'm glad I did. And I'm going to tell you right now, this was actually a really good one. This was a really good game. I was surprised as to how good it was, only because I had a prediction idea as to what I thought it was going to be like. But then looking at the game, I was like, yeah, this turned out way different than I thought it was going to be. So it was one of those things where it's like, I'm really glad that I waited, because since February of its original release, when it had the physical version released, they released it a DLC add-on, an additional update rather per se. And I'll talk about all that in great detail, but I want to talk about the base game first, and then we'll talk about how I went through it and stuff like that, because I feel like that plays a big part in the game's design. So let's just talk about the base game itself. So the story basically tells of an apprentice of somebody, whether it be a male or a female, per se. Basically, they are getting revenge for their teacher, their master. And basically, throughout the entire story, you get to fight 5 of these targets that had basically played a part in this attack towards this teacher of his and stuff like that, or her, depending. And they are to go after these 5 people. These 5 different bosses are basically the main targets that you will go after, and they all take place in 5 different levels. And so right off the bat, the story concept is fairly simple. You are basically exacting revenge for your master, or Sifu, as it is. As I believe Sifu is a Chinese term, I believe. I'll have to look that up later, but I believe it's like a Chinese term for teacher, in a sense. I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong. I'm willing to admit that I'm wrong. But, with that being said, so, with that story concept, it's fairly simple. But, the gameplay is where it gets interesting. The gameplay is a mixture of short, yet there's a lot to cover. You are exploring 5 areas in the game. You are exploring 5 different levels in which where the end result is you fighting against the target boss that you are going to be fighting. Next to that, you have the fact that you're going to be fighting sub-bosses, followed by fighting against normal enemies and stuff of that nature. And you're going to be using your tactics as Kung Fu. You're using your Kung Fu abilities. And I'm going to tell you right now, the controls for this game are spot on. They're surprisingly spot on. Like, you literally feel like as though as if you are actually committing the art of Kung Fu. And it's really well responsive. It's fast paced, and it really moves really well. It's really good, I have to admit. I was really getting into the combat so well, in fact, that I was like, I can't believe how good it was. But next to the actual Kung Fu, you also have to deflect the attacks, and those deflects actually help in the game itself. Now, some people will be like, well, deflect is sort of like parrying, right? In a sense, but you don't realize how big of an importance it actually plays in this game. Deflecting actually helps you way more than you think, and the timing, it's a learning curve. It's a learning curve type thing, and if you do not use this deflect technique, you will fall quicker, because enemies will interrupt you like no tomorrow. And this is just the standard mode. We're talking about the standard mode itself, We're not talking about the higher difficulty. We're not talking about the lower difficulty. The standard, which is basically the base game that is in the main game when you download it and everything like that. There's no other alternative difficulty whenever it was first released and stuff. So I wanted to try this out, and whoo boy, will they take you down. But the enemies and bosses won't take you down. The death count will. So whenever I first found out about Sifu, it was saying about for every time you die, you age. And I was familiar with the concept of like, okay, so every time you die, you grow 1 year older in age. And you do see that within the character. You see that grow throughout the entire time, for every time you die, you do see the character actually age and stuff. And it's really cool. I'm in love with this mechanic, okay? It's an interesting mechanic because of the fact that you have the fact that the worse you play, the worse your character is going to be. But the better you play, the better off your character is going to be in the long run, obviously. But here's what's even more interesting. It's the fact that unlike in, say for example, Chronos of the Ash, instead of just dying and respawning to the beginning of the area, you die, you respawn right where you died. I'm not even kidding. It is so fast-paced. Literally, you die, you respawn, and you're back up to the same enemies that you were fighting, or the same boss, with their remaining health pool. And that is cool. The fact that you don't have to worry about starting over a level or anything like that. It just happens right there. But in the base game, if you die, it keeps up with a counter. So until you beat a boss, that counter will grow. And if that counter grows, you lose a lot of years. Oh, you lose a lot of years. The first time I did this mode, I was like, oh, we're playing for keeps, huh? Okay, wow. So, say for example, you died once, you lose 1 year, right? If you die again, that's 2, which means you lose 2 at the same time. So, in the span of losing 2 lives, you lose 3 years. So, yeah, this game plays for keeps. So, prepare to see the age noticeably be fast. It's insane. I was like, oh my gosh, this literally tells you do not die, or you will die. And in fact, you will die. It's not a matter of like, oh yeah, you live up to 100 years or something like that. No, there is a set limit in this game. And the limit is actually age 70, but I got to 80 on my first time playing through this. And I was like, ooh, okay, wow. Because it's like, you know, you go up to 70 if you go through a normal pace and stuff like that. But because of how often I was dying, that death counter grew. And then by the time the final amulet disappeared and stuff like that, I was at age 80. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm terrible at this game. I get it. Just, wow. I was like, okay, so the game isn't hard on its own. The death counter system is hard, and is very unforgiving. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you wanted a little bit of challenge, yes, that system is available. Just know that if you die, you're going to be losing a lot of years real fast. And it's like, gosh, this is murder. Oh man, versus if you've played it on student difficulty, on the other hand. Not only are the AIs not as aggressive, but you don't have to worry about the death counter system, and you only lose 1 year at a time. So it's not as, I suppose the word is, as torturous of a death counter system, but rather is more natural, is more forgiven, I think, in a sense. But in the same way, you know, maybe some people want that system, you know? It makes more sense that you would want that, so that way you can at least understand the gameplay. And I feel like, because whenever the game first came out, a lot of people loved it, but they also said it was very hard. And I'm like, how hard is it? You know, like, I don't think I heard anybody say the phrase that the game was going to be hard. I just knew that the death age system thing was a thing. But now that I played the game, now I see what people were talking about. It's not so much the act of dying so much. It's the act of how the death counter will kill you faster than the death system itself. And it's like, shit. Because it's insane. It's absolutely insane. So, for first-time players, if you do plan on playing Sifu, I probably would recommend starting on the student and try to get familiar with the gameplay and everything like that. Get familiar with the moveset and stuff like that. And that way you can have a better time of enjoying the game. And who knows, maybe you can grow with it. You know, go from student to disciple, and then to master mode. Because I hadn't played through master, and I'm afraid to, because chances are, those enemies will be murderous on me. I imagine so. And if not the enemies, The death counter probably will. But aside from that, you also have the fact that there's this detective board. This detective board sort of acts as a lore base to explain the individual targets that you're hunting down. It explains a little bit more in depth as to who they are and everything like that, how they came to be and stuff like that. It develops as you continue to find items throughout the entire levels and stuff. And they're hidden pretty well. They're hidden pretty well because certain ones will not open until you get a certain thing from another level. And then you can either backtrack to that level in order to get that thing unlocked. Which is a thing you can do. You can actually go back to the previous areas. But there's a little consequence, but I'll get to that in just a sec. But it's cool the fact that you can select the level as you go through the game. And if you want to, you can go back to the level in order to unlock something or whatever like that and complete the detective board. Which is really cool, and I did like that. However, though, by going back to previous areas, if you don't go through the main game process naturally, if you end up going back to a previous area, you actually rewind time. So in other words, your years reset, but so too will your experience or the abilities that you earn. Now, there's a way you can keep the abilities, because the weird thing is, yes, there is a skill tree, but the skill tree acts differently. You have the fact that, yes, you can unlock the individual abilities and moves and stuff like that, but then there's an extra layer to where you can permanently keep them. So in other words, as you unlock it the first time, that means you can use it throughout that particular playthrough. But if you beat it and you go back, or if you select one of the missions and go back or whatever, you lose that ability. You know, you don't keep it technically. But if you were to unlock it and have it permanently set, which takes like 5 times afterwards, you will keep it, and regardless if you go back to the beginning of the game, or if you select the levels and stuff like that, you keep that ability with you. So it's very time consuming in the sense of that you're unlocking these abilities in order to keep them permanently, to where it doesn't matter how many playthroughs you play, you start with all the abilities with you and stuff like that. Next to the gameplay, the art style I absolutely love. The art style is absolutely beautiful in this game. It just kind of goes to show you, you don't need 4K resolution or ray tracing or whatever in order to make a beautiful game. Like, in my personal opinion, you know, people always talk about how absolutely insane we have gotten to making games look more realistic and stuff. And that is true. We have definitely come a long way. But games like Sifu kind of tells you, you don't need to go the realistic route, you just need to make it more artistic-like, you know? And the way that Sifu feels, the more I play, the more it feels somewhat like Samurai Jack, in the sense of like how the atmosphere feels, and as well as how the character designs are. It feels very Samurai Jack-ish, and it's very good. I really do like the art style. But what's even more so is the story pace. I love the story. I love how quick you can go through the levels and stuff like that. You can go through one level and take anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour. You know, do whatever you want to do, whether it's take on the enemies, the bosses, or look for the items for the detective board and stuff like that. It's all really good. But also, too, whenever you go through the playthrough the first time, obviously you're going to go through the revenge part of it all. You know, you're taking down these enemies and stuff like that. You're taking them down, you're killing them and stuff. But here's the cool thing. It's true, you can go through the normal route of revenge. Or there's a little secret that you wouldn't know. In fact, it doesn't really tell you. You find out later on, and you could probably look it up like I did. But there is a way that you can actually spare these targets. You can actually spare the bosses. You don't have to naturally kill them. You can spare them. So what it is that you go through the process of fighting them. And when you have the option to take them down, stop. Don't take them down. Wait for them to regenerate to where they fight you again. And when you actually get them to their second takedown, there's an option prompt to spare them with the left directional pad. And by sparing them, you unlock a new pathway to an additional ending, which is essentially the true ending, I believe. And I love that. I love the fact that you can choose to either kill the targets or keep them alive. And it's like, that kind of adds a new level of gameplay. You know, it really does. And again, I love the gameplay. The gameplay is so solid, so good, and so fun. the whole level design, the artistic style and everything like that, I love how it looks, and I love the story pacing. I love the fact that it has a two-sided way, and it works so well. It looks so good. It feels so right. Overall, this is actually a really good and really built game. And if I'm not mistaken, this is technically labeled as like an indie game, right? I'm pretty sure it's labeled as an indie game, but for an indie game, this is a solid game. This is like really solid, spot on good. Which is why, and it's going to be hard to recommend this to just anyone. You know, again, it is difficult. It is a difficult game. But because of the recent add-on patch that it has, to where you can select the difficulty, I think most players would still enjoy this. I believe some people will still enjoy it. Again, there is a learning curve with the combat and stuff like that. You do need to master the combat a little bit. But once you finally master it, it is so rewarding. And it feels so good to play this game. It does. It feels so good to play it. But would I recommend it to anybody? For just anybody alone? Probably not. You know, I can't just label it as a 5. But I feel like it would be a solid 4 rating. Like, I can imagine if I could find somebody that says, I like fast-paced action games. This is a fast-paced action game. I want a kung fu fighting game. This is a kung fu fighting game. You know, this is a solid build game. This is really, really good. The difficulty, admittedly, might play people off. But again, if you play it on student mode and try to master the controls a little bit, it can be really good. It can be really solid. Again, it took me a while to master the gameplay, but once I finally got used to understanding how the gameplay worked and how to deflect and stuff like that, how well it tunes out and stuff, it felt so good, and it was so fun. That's the thing. It was so fun and entertaining. It's a really entertaining game. So yes, I would definitely give it a 4 out of 5, in my personal opinion. It definitely is a really good one. And let me just say this right now. 2022, we've had a lot of good games, but this one was really good. I'm glad I finally got to play it. Anyway guys, that's it for this video. So let me know in the comments below. Have you played Sifu? What are your thoughts and opinions on Sifu? Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it or whatever? If you hated it, then maybe you could try going back to it, because again, the recent update that it gave allows for difficulty selection, so maybe it won't be as bad as you remember. Who knows? So anyway guys, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you in the next episode. This is BlackCross signing off. Catch you guys later.